My grandma left her everything to me, and when my family found out they lost it, I didn't know a will could tear a family apart until the lawyer read my name out loud. Even now, when I think back to that moment, I can still feel the air change in the room, like someone had opened a window in the middle of winter. I remember sitting there, hands folded in my lap, not expecting anything, not hoping for anything. I was just there because that's what you do when your grandmother dies. You show up, you sit quietly, and you listen. I never imagined I'd walk out carrying something that would make my own blood turn against me. My grandma, Alina, was the only person in my family who ever made me feel truly seen. Not tolerated, not included out of obligation. Seen, she had this way of listening that made you feel like your words mattered, even if you were talking about something small. Growing up, I spent more time at her house than anywhere else. It wasn't fancy. It smelled like old books, tea, and whatever she had baked that morning. But it felt safe in a way my own home never did. My parents got divorced when I was young, and after that, everything felt temporary. I lived mostly with my mom, but her attention was always pulled in 100 directions. Work, bills, stress, and later, her new relationship. My dad was around, but distant in that polite, weekend visit kind of way. My grandma was the constant. She picked me up from school. She helped me with homework. She sat next to me when I cried over things I couldn't even explain yet. She never rushed me. She never told me I was too much. The rest of the family didn't see her the way I did. To them, she was just mom or grandma, someone they assumed would always be there, always give, always understand. They visited on holidays. They called when they needed advice or money or a place to stay for a night. I was the one who showed up on random Tuesdays. I was the one who noticed when her hands started shaking more, when she repeated the same story twice, when the stairs became harder for her. As I got older, people started joking about how close we were. "You're her favorite," my aunt would say with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. I always brushed it off. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Families joke. Families tease. I didn't want to believe there was any jealousy underneath it. I didn't want to believe love could turn competitive. When my grandma got sick, things changed fast. Hospital visits replaced casual afternoons. Conversations became shorter, heavier. She didn't talk much about the future, but sometimes she'd look at me in that quiet way she had and say things like, "Promise me you won't let them make you small." I never asked who she meant by them. I think part of me already knew. She passed away on a rainy Thursday morning. I remember because the sky felt fitting, gray and heavy, like it was holding its breath too. The funeral was crowded. People came out of nowhere, people I hadn't seen in years. They cried loudly, hugged tightly, and spoke about her like they knew her deeply. I stood off to the side, numb, listening to stories that didn't match the woman I knew. It felt strange, like we were talking about two different people. A week later, we gathered at the lawyer's office. I went because my mom told me I should. She said it was important, and said we needed to support each other. Her voice was calm, but I could already feel the tension under it. My aunt was there, my uncle, and a few cousins. Everyone dressed nicely, everyone was polite in that stiff, uncomfortable way families get when money is involved, even if no one says it out loud. I sat near the end of the table, quiet as usual. I assumed my grandma's things would be split evenly, maybe some jewelry here, some savings there. I expected to walk away with a small keepsake at most, a book, a scarf, something sentimental. I wasn't prepared for the lawyer to clear his throat and say, "The primary beneficiary is Alina's granddaughter." For a second, I thought I misheard him. I looked around, waiting for someone to correct him, to laugh and say there'd been a mistake. No one did. The room was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. My mom turned slowly to look at me, her face unreadable. My aunt's mouth actually fell open. The lawyer continued, reading details I barely processed. The house, the savings, the investments, most of it, left to me. I felt sick, not excited, not relieved, sick. Because I could feel what was coming before anyone even spoke. It started with questions that sounded innocent. "Are you sure? That doesn't sound like Mom." She must have been confused. My uncle laughed nervously and said maybe it was an old version of the will. Someone else said we should look into it. I sat there, heart pounding, feeling like I'd done something wrong just by existing. I tried to say something. I tried to explain that I hadn't known, that I hadn't asked for any of it. But my voice came out small, and no one was really listening. They were already talking over each other, already rewriting the story in their heads. In their version, I wasn't the quiet granddaughter who showed up and cared. I was the manipulator, the one who must have gotten into her head. On the drive home, my mom didn't say much. She kept her eyes on the road, hands tight on the steering wheel. When we finally pulled into the driveway, she sighed and said, "You have to understand how this looks." That sentence stayed with me. Not "how are you feeling?" Not "this must be overwhelming." Just how it looked. Over the next few days, the messages started. At first, they were subtle. Comments about how my grandma had been lonely, about how older people are easily influenced. Then they got sharper. My aunt accused me outright of turning my grandma against the family. My cousin asked if I planned on sharing, or if I was just going to keep everything for myself. I didn't even know what to say. Every word I tried to form felt wrong. I replayed every memory with my grandma, searching for something I'd missed, but all I found was love, time spent, care freely given, and somehow that felt like the worst crime of all. What hurt most was how quickly the warmth disappeared. People who had hugged me at the funeral now spoke to me like a stranger. Plans were made without me. I told myself it was temporary, that things would settle. I wanted to believe that money hadn't changed them, even though it already had. Late one night, I went through a box my grandma had given me months before she passed. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some addressed to me, some just written, never sent. In one, she talked about feeling invisible to her own children, about being treated like a resource instead of a person. She wrote about me with such clarity it made my chest ache. She said she trusted me. She said she knew I would use what she left not just for myself, but wisely. Reading those words broke something open in me. It wasn't guilt I felt, it was grief mixed with understanding. The next family dinner was tense from the moment I walked in. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Plates clinked too loudly. Someone made a joke about new money that wasn't really a joke at all. I sat there, pushing food around my plate, realizing this wasn't about the will anymore. This was about long-held resentment, about comparisons made in silence, about the story they'd always told themselves about me and my place in the family. Part of me wanted to give it all back just to make it stop, to hand over the keys, sign the papers, and disappear. I told myself that would prove I wasn't who they thought I was. But another part of me, the part that remembered my grandma's voice, knew that wouldn't fix anything. It would just confirm their version of the story. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized something that scared me more than their anger. This wasn't a misunderstanding that would clear up with time. This was a shift, a line crossed, and no matter what I did next, nothing would ever go back to the way it was. A few weeks after everything became official, my aunt called me and asked if we could talk. Her voice was overly calm, the way people sound when they've rehearsed what they're about to say. She invited me over for coffee, said she wanted to clear the air. I went, even though my stomach was tight the entire drive. Part of me still hoped this was salvageable, that if I just explained myself better, they'd see me again. She didn't waste much time. She told me my grandma had been manipulated. She said loneliness makes people vulnerable and that I'd been around too much. She didn't say the word planned, but she didn't have to. It hung there between us. When I tried to tell her about the letters, about how my grandma felt, she waved it off, said older people exaggerate, said I was young and didn't understand family dynamics. I sat there nodding, realizing this conversation wasn't about truth, it was about control. When I left her house, I cried in my car for a long time. Not loud, dramatic crying, just quiet tears that wouldn't stop. It finally hit me then. They weren't grieving my grandma, they were grieving what they felt entitled to, and I was standing in the way of that. Things with my mom got worse too. She started keeping her distance, calling less, asking fewer questions about my life. When we did talk, everything somehow circled back to the inheritance. She asked if I'd thought about selling the house, if I'd considered helping out the family, if I really needed all of it. Every question came with a subtle judgment underneath. I felt like I was constantly being offered a test I didn't even know the rules to. One night, after another tense phone call, I went back to my grandma's house alone. It was quiet in that familiar way that used to comfort me. I walked through each room slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of door frames. This place held more of my memories than my own childhood home ever had. And for the first time since her death, I allowed myself to feel something close to peace. I realized she hadn't just left me assets, she'd left me a choice. I didn't tell my family my plans right away. I took time to think. I spoke to a financial advisor. I read. I asked questions. I remembered my grandma's words about not letting anyone make me small. Eventually, I made decisions that felt right to me. I kept the house. I invested carefully. I set aside money for my future instead of apologizing for it. When my family found out, the reaction was immediate. Angry messages. Accusations of selfishness. One cousin told me I'd changed. That one hurt the most because I hadn't. They just finally saw me as someone with something they wanted. Holidays became complicated. Invitations were given half-heartedly, then withdrawn. When I did show up, I was treated like a guest instead of family. Conversations tiptoed around me. Jokes were made at my expense. Someone once said, "Must be nice," when I mentioned a work opportunity, and everyone laughed except me. I stopped going after that. The distance hurt, but it also gave me clarity. Without their constant noise, I started to hear my own thoughts again. I noticed how much lighter I felt, how I didn't dread my phone buzzing, how my days felt calmer. I began to understand something I hadn't before. Love that depends on what you can give isn't love. It's a transaction. Months passed. Life moved forward. I fixed up the house slowly, room by room. I planted flowers in the yard like my grandma used to. I hung photos she loved. I built routines that felt grounding. And every now and then, I'd find something she'd written tucked into a book or drawer. Little reminders that she knew exactly what she was doing. Eventually, the family stopped pushing as hard. Not because they understood, but because they were tired. I was no longer reacting the way they expected. I wasn't begging to be forgiven. I wasn't offering explanations. I wasn't negotiating my worth. And without that tension to feed on, they lost interest. My mom and I reached a quiet understanding. We don't talk about inheritance anymore. Our relationship is different now. Thinner, more careful. I've accepted that she may never fully see things from my perspective, and that's something I've had to grieve in its own way. Letting go of the idea of what you want a parent to be can be harder than letting go of people who openly hurt you. Sometimes I still think about how easily things could have gone differently. If my grandma had split everything evenly, we'd probably still be having Sunday dinners and polite conversations. That thought used to make me sad. Now it just makes me honest. Those connections weren't as strong as I thought if money could snap them so cleanly. What I gained wasn't just financial stability, it was independence. It was permission to trust myself, to believe that being chosen doesn't make you guilty, that being loved doesn't require apology. I stopped shrinking my dreams to make others comfortable. I stopped explaining my decisions to people who had already decided to misunderstand me. I still miss my grandma every day. There are moments I want to call her, to tell her what happened, to ask if I handled it right. But I think she knew. I think this was part of what she wanted for me. Not the conflict, but the strength that came from surviving it. The hardest lesson in all of this wasn't about inheritance or family dynamics, it was about identity. For a long time, I defined myself by how well I fit into other people's expectations. This forced me to stand on my own, whether I was ready or not. And once I did, I realized I'd been capable all along. If you've ever been put in a position where choosing yourself meant disappointing people you love, I want you to know something. It doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make you selfish. Sometimes it just means you were never meant to stay small for their comfort. My grandma left me everything she had, not just what was written in legal documents, but what she believed in me. And I'm finally living in a way that honors that. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever been misunderstood by the people closest to you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more real stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your friends and family.